So hi everyone and welcome back to Precog time after a small hiatus, but we're back and really happy and lucky to be talking tonight with Renee Carmichael, who is a researcher, writer, and artist, and also contributed to our fifth issue, Bubble Orchestra, which we'll talk about a little bit later. She's written and produced work around themes such as choreographies for hire sold on eBay, masks, carrots, and the web browser, the dance epidemic of 1518, the website's relationship to print, obsessive compulsive disorder and technology, singing IBM anthems and code, breathing in the time of social media, machine learning in dance and code, and offline coded scrolling dances. Her texts have been published internationally in both academic and artistic publications, including #XStrange, a curatorial intervention on eBay by Michigan University Publishing, Periphrasis Journal, Unlikely Journal, Sync.io, among others. She's a doctoral candidate in comparative art theory at the Universidad Nacional de 3 de Febrero in Argentina. Her thesis research focuses on the aesthetics of contemporary dance and code algorithms, exploring a relationship between the formal and the feeling. She has a master's degree in interactive media, critical theory and practice from Goldsmiths College in London, has previously worked as a researcher in the hybrid publishing lab at Leuphana University in Germany, and is founder of the experimental publishing project Flee Immediately. Her research, writing, and artworks often bring together poetic and interdisciplinary ideas that explore the boundaries between theory and practice. And so following from that brief overview of your work, we wanted to start out by asking you how your interests in these kind of interrelated fields have developed, and what your personal story is in finding these intersections between coding, dancing, and writing, including how your work has evolved in these media, and how you're thinking about them in relation to one another.
Yeah, sure. I mean, I often have this feel that I say this, like, I'm not a dancer, I'm not a coder, because I'm not technically professionally trained in either, but I experiment with both. In the end, I would say I'm a writer. That could be true, that I've always felt that my way of thinking is through writing. But basically, I became interested in dance after my dad died. So my dad passed away in 2013. And I was living in Berlin at the time, and I started going salsa dancing. I don't know why. I just went alone once a week and like basically learned there. And I realized there was something of the way of processing through dancing that I needed. At the same time, I realized, and I still don't know the answer to this question. I don't know why I'm connecting dance and codes, even though I'm slowly arriving at it. But I think there's something about also the way I think with codes, there's a way of processing through code that also I think in both dance and code, there's something I don't understand. So I keep trying to work with them as languages, of trying to almost think about the way that I think. In a way, it's like a process of thinking for me, or a space of thinking. And I think writing for me somehow has both of those elements. Like, writing is where I think. In a way, it's easier, but at the same time, it's like a process that I don't necessarily understand either. But it's something that I'm very comfortable in, maybe more than dancing or coding. Then what happened was after I finished my master's, so my master's, I learned to code, the very basics, the logic of coding. So I always say I'm good at problem solving, writing codes, but not maybe creating a whole system, but I can somehow like jump in. And I also think of codes as writing. Like, I've written some code poems, which we can maybe see one in a bit. But I guess for me, in that way, there's a connection between way of thinking. And also, when I went back to read some of the essays I had written in my undergraduate degree, I realized I was already thinking about movement. So there's something in the way that I'm thinking through movement that really helped me process. So yeah, this is one of the, this one actually isn't written in code, but it's a text I wrote that has to do with fortnight. So it's a fortnight choreography that you actually have to read it by moving the paper. This is like all of the pages small put together, which is also quite beautiful. Um, but yeah, I guess for me, I'm interested in them and connecting them as a space to think. And often I think my work deals with them as topics, but maybe it looks at something specific, such as a gesture or the idea of scrolling. Or it's not that I think of all of them as these huge topics in my work, because I think when I actually go to produce it, I start from a very small frustration that I have with something, or at this moment I don't know, for example, at this moment I've been thinking about the blockchain because my partner recently has been involved in the blockchain, and I started to think about how can I dance on the blockchain. Like, it's something that I don't know, but I thought, I don't know, it's something I became curious about, so I started to connect it as a process of thinking. I don't know if that answers your question, because it's, in some ways, I'm always working through processes a lot. So I don't often have the words. Like, I often do make these connections without knowing the answers. And then it's only the years later I go back and I say, okay, I was trying to say this, or now I understand this from my experience of it.
Well, I think maybe we can show the clip of one of the videos that you made. You made this video in quarantine, is that right?
Yeah, so this video, like I said at the beginning, I was frustrated of being in quarantine. I was frustrated of having to define dance and code as separate things. So I thought, like, what happens if I just do them together? So to make this video, basically what I did was I compiled all the texts I can find that I've written on my computer into a single document. And then I fed it to a machine learning algorithm that outputted text in my style of writing, which are there. I mean, I had a lot of fun with it. I was laughing a lot because it's really like quite, well, uncanny. It's like my voice, but not my voice. And then I read the text out loud and danced them afterwards, which was basically improvisation, but we can watch it and then.
My feeling of dance and code is another thing altogether, not only in the code itself, but also in the way in which I feel at the work, in the space between each other, at the bridge, between the glass, between the countless energies, between the multiple layers of code, between the countless codes, between the countless threads of execution, between the countless threads of the code, between the countless threads of code, between the countless threads of the different layers of computing, between the countless threads of mathematics and code, and between the countless threads of thought. Between the countless threads of mathematics and code, and between the countless threads of technology, and between the countless threads of the computing, between the countless threads of mathematics and code, and between the countless threads of thought, between the countless threads of statistics, and between the countless threads of technology, and between the countless threads of art, between the countless threads of computing, and between the countless threads.
So yeah, that text wasn't written by me. It was written by the machine learning algorithm based on my style of writing.
And can you talk a little bit about the choreography, like how you decide how you're going to move in the space?
Yeah, I mean, in this case, it was based purely on improvisation. So after I read the text out loud, I really danced what I felt. So on some of them, it's based on the rhythm, because some of the texts have a lot of repetition. Like, there's one text that says like sort of, sort of, sort of, sort of, sort of. So obviously that's made me incorporate a sort of rhythm. To be honest, in this video we saw, I can't remember what it was. I mean, I think it was probably something also rhythmic, because there's the countless threads of. But I guess I do it a lot in this case. I do improvisation, and the name of the work is My Feeling of Dance and Code. So I was trying to arrive at if I could get a feeling of them together, which I think maybe in some ways I failed, because I don't know where the code is anymore. Or the code is somehow in the way that the text is written, but I don't know if you can see that. And I think what happened with this work is it actually became a lot more about being in quarantine than about dance and code somehow, which is something I realized afterwards.
Well, I wonder if So a little bit of what you were talking about just before we started, was your time in quarantine and sort of doing Alexander technique twice a week. And you described it as a process or kind of a technique which requires you to look at what was it that you said? It's what sorry, the word just like flew away from my mind.
The habits?
Habits, exactly. The habits
Yeah.
of the body, right? And so I feel like in some ways there's a relationship between physicality, the idea of the habitual, and like code as a kind of architecture, and being able to see like the habits of code or the habits of a glitch and the habits of a body seem like they're not that far away from one another. So, and a lot of what you write about and include in your work has to do with the feeling of technology, or how it is that we feel with and through technology. And I was wondering if you could talk a little bit more about those ideas and how you feel through technology.
Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of the work that I do I started thinking about this after my master's, where I realized that we can all learn the logic of code. It doesn't mean we have to become a programmer, but it's a language that you can learn how it functions, at least. And I think a lot of this idea that I started with, maybe like the idea of scrolling or moving online, came from this idea that's like, how can we be aware of this? How can we be aware of the way that a design controls how we move? Now, as you mentioned, the Alexander technique, I think what happened is I'm realizing there's a lot of value in attention, and not necessarily the idea of like you're scrolling on Instagram and you need engagement, but I think it's like, how is my body giving attention to the technology in the moment? And I think that's what I'm trying to get at a bit with the idea of feeling, is that it doesn't have to be some sort of expert knowledge. It's like, what do I actually feel? What am I actually doing? And I think in one sense, this Alexander class has really helped me during quarantine. It's all very recent, but for example, at one point we were trying to do a spiral in the class, which is something that in theory is what you do as a baby. It should be something that it's a very natural human movement to twist. But it's something, yes, we walk upright, we forget how to do it. And I was trying to do it, and there was like a weird process of like thinking of it as an abstract thing and then actually doing it. In some ways you have to think of it because you have to like follow all of the points to do it properly. You have to like let it flow. And I think maybe that's a bit of what I'm feeling at the moment, is like a sort of, my relationship to technology is like, how can I understand the relationship between this abstract thoughts that I have, that I'm working on, and this sort of like just doing it. Like, I think there's a lot about, I mean, I've written a lot about muscle memory and this idea of like paying attention to these gestures that we do all the time. Yeah, I mean, I think it's sometimes very hard for me to put into words all these things, which is why I keep working on it. Because it's in a way it's very abstract, but at the same time it's something I very much feel. And both of these places, like abstraction and feeling, are very hard to put into words in some ways. Or I don't know, at least for me, maybe some people can put feeling into words a lot better than me. But
yeah, I wanted to ask you actually, because language is so important in your work, what it's been like to be, you had to learn Spanish, and then I guess in your mind you must be constantly translating between English, Spanish, and how does that influence how you think about dance and code and abstraction?
yeah, I mean, I guess in a way, as I think I said in the beginning, they're all languages. So I'm translating between dance and Spanish. It's not that I'm only translating between Spanish and English, which I think is another difficulty that I have, is like, how do I communicate these languages that are very different, that speak to very different people. And one thing I thought about recently is because I was part of this project that we did here that was translating Gertrude Stein's text on Isadora Duncan called Orta or the One, or I think that's the name. But basically it's a text that's very rhythmic, and it says like the one, she's the one, dancing the one, like it keeps repeating the one. And we did what they called here, which isn't my term, it's what I was part of a collective that they proposed it, but it was called traducción salvaje, or like wild or savage translation. And it was, well, we basically, like, I think I was the only native English speaker, actually. The text is English, we translated to Spanish. So it's a lot of people that aren't native speakers translating to English, and we basically wrote a text with a lot of comments on the side. And like whatever ideas came to mind, you could add them. So it became a completely new book in a way. And also there wasn't necessarily consistency in the translation, because each person took their part and translated it how they wanted to, in a way. And I kind of think of it as that. It's like this weird space of thinking between languages, because sometimes if you ask me to translate a word, I wouldn't be able to do it directly. And I don't know. I guess I like to use the language, like to define it by how I dance it, or define it by how I don't know, how I write it in the moment. Which then, if I go back to it later, maybe I use it differently with time. I think it's very much about this process. I don't know. I think, for example, I called this. I think I said feeling infinite scrolls. Mm-hmm. And infinite scrolls is a phrase that I've used for a long time, but I don't know if I've ever actually said what I mean. I think I just use it in the context of the project I'm working on. And in all of these like small bits, like my dance class, thinking about doing a spiral, this idea of attention, like in the past, maybe infinite scrolls wasn't about intention. I was more critiquing like this startup tech culture in a way. And now I'm actually thinking, oh no, what I want to think now is the intention of it. So I think that's why, in a way, I guess it's like my work changes a lot of formats because of this idea of like, I think like language and format go together in a way. Like you have to have, it's not just the content, it's the way it is portrayed as well.
Yeah, I think in your work you also really make use of a certain kind, it's like you make use of the juxtaposition of languages and translation. Like I'm gonna bring up the Infinite Scroll performance or lecture that you gave. It's sort of like a performative lecture, but like that in the idea, like one of the things that I think about with that piece and with a lot of your writing and work is about how the same idea could be obscured to itself in this translation, or that you'd understand something different in the translation, but not by way of clarifying content, like by way of understanding phenomenology. And I feel like phenomenology is actually quite an important part of how you're thinking through these ideas. So like thinking about the phenomenology of technology versus the phenomenology of poetry versus the phenomenology of gaming, or the phenomenology of reading, or something like this, feel like things that you're exploring as you move across mediums. But I'm just gonna, or breathing in the time of social media. I don't know why I like relate that one to Infinite Scroll, but
yeah, it could be.
Yeah, that was like the image that stayed in my mind. All right, what's on your mind, Renee?
What stories? Get up. Open computers. Respond to emails. Open face, quick scroll, respond to emails, quick scroll, open system, reviews, scroll, one new email, check quickly, delete, one new Facebook notification, check email, 115 new tweets, open, scroll, one new email, open, one new Facebook notification, respond to the message, scroll, awaiting response. Waiting, 215 tweets. Who to follow? You are. Yes, no. That is interesting. Yes. One new email, one new Facebook. Already 300 new tweets. Why are they not responding? Yes, no. Yes, no. Tuesday, 8 a.m. Wednesday, 8 a.m. Thursday, 8 a.m. Friday, 8 a.m. Inhale, exhale. Inhale, exhale. Through the nose. Inhale for a count of 4. Exhale for a count of 4. Inhale for a count of 4. Exhale for a count of 4. Inhale for a count of 4. Exhale for a count of 4. Inhale for a count of 4. Exhale for a count of 4. Put one hand on your chest, the other on your belly. Breathe deep through the nose. Make sure to place your diaphragm. Stretch the lungs, 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 stretch the lungs. Repeat, 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 repeat. Starting to meditate pose, repeat. Starting to meditate pose, repeat. Hold the right hand, repeat. Repeat. Over the right nostril, repeat. And inhale to the left, repeat. 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 At the peak, repeat. Repeat. Close the left nostril, repeat. Repeat. With the ring together. Repeat. Repeat. Exhale to the right. Repeat. Repeat. Continue. 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 Repeat. Continue. Repeat. Continue. Repeat. Continue. Continue. Repeat. Repeat. Continue. Repeat. Relax. Repeat. Relax. 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 Relax, 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 relax. Focus on the light pause at the end of each breath. Wait here, 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 wait here. Wait, raise your hands to the sky and little fist. Inhale through your mouth. With every exhale, drop your elbows on your side body. Say ha from the bottom of the diaphragm. Be loud. Put your hand on your chest, the other on your belly. Breathe deeply through the nose. Repeat while doing the follows. Knit your eyebrows together, release. Tilt your head towards your neck. Push your chin to your chest, release. Shrug, release. Push your arms away from your torso, stretch them, relax and by your side. Point your toes, stretch, relax, 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 relax.
I think that's a good place to pause.
Yeah, so this, I mean, something funny to say about this work is this actually only the second performance I've ever done in my life, which in a way, I think I really have, I don't know, I find performance really rewarding, but at the same time, I'm terrified of it. Because somehow I guess I've been like comfortable in writing, but actually to do it in performance in this live way, where writing you have to spend the time of doing it, or you can take time to edit, but a performance, no. And I think this work is something I chose to include it, even though I don't have a very good recording of it. It was someone that sent me from their phone. But I think it's, I was actually thinking it would be really interesting for me to do it now, to redo the same performance and see what would be different after being in quarantine and seeing how it would feel differently, because basically it's a series of breathing exercises that I created into some sort of dance. And I don't know if you could hear, but I'm actually like breathing, which might be a bit hard to hear from the video because it's not very good, but I'm actually doing the breathing as well. As I perform it. And I guess, something I was thinking about this idea of thinking about the feminology of my body and the feminology of the digital is something that I actually was very recently thinking about, because I started reading this book about digital objects that talked a lot about how a digital object is by Yu Kui, who's like a Chinese philosopher that's writes about the digital. And he talks a lot about how it's like in relation between like HTML and the sort of time that the digital has. So like the execution, which I think a lot of my work, I think about the execution, like this time of the executing code behind that we don't often see, but a code in some ways always has to execute in the present. So there's always like something, I guess that's maybe where dance also relates to code, or that's a point where you could almost see them as something similar, or I would argue. You could debate about it, of course, but I think there's something interesting about this idea of execution. And I guess in this performance, there's something a bit about I guess it's like trying to reach this rhythm, like trying to keep up with the rhythm of Facebook, while at the same time like letting myself breathe. And actually during the performance, like I had to practice a lot, because by the end I'm almost hyperventilating. Like and I don't have the practice at this moment. I did it in 2017, I think, and I've taken a lot more dance classes since then. But I didn't have the practice of like knowing how to breathe properly. And so I guess it's like my relationship to the other rhythm that is like there all the time in front of me, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I wonder if that moment of the repetition of relax would hit a lot different now than it actually made me like a little anxious at one point because I feel like we've been in that moment a lot during this time, or at least I have been. Have you ever thought about working with different choreographers to sort of like, you know, reinterpret code, or you've only sort of worked with your own body and dance?
Well, the first performance I did, which is the offline dance, which we can also maybe watch, that I did in collaboration with a choreographer, which was actually the first performance I've ever done, which is actually a choreography that I wrote to be scrolled online to see an exhibition that I curated online. So it was actually a choreography that you had to do scroll right, scroll left to see the works. And so then I asked the choreographer to help me do it offline. But of course, I was limited in my skills of dancing at that time. I guess it would be interesting because something that I learned about the dance class is there's really a different way of thinking, or there's a difference. Yeah, it's a different language, I guess. And I think it would be interesting to put that more into dialogue than I do at the moment, because as you can see, this project is also some ways very personal, or I call it projects, but it's like traveling through one thing. And in some ways it's like very personal, which maybe I've been thinking recently of how to open it up as well to others.
I mean, it seems like it's very personal in the sense that your interests are like somewhat idiosyncratic, but like the things that you're talking about are the structures of systems that in fact like influence our movement, right? So like one of the things that it seems like one of the things that I get from looking at your work is sort of there's usually a moment where the interface you're talking about becomes like, it becomes clear that this interface already structures my behavior or my movement. And that like the, you know, when Kelly was talking about this moment where relax is said over and over and over again, it like, it hits home because like I'm already overwhelmed by the scroll, right? Or like Facebook has already told me what I'm gonna do tomorrow, right? It keeps a social calendar for me, right? It determines how I'm already moving physically. And so being able to abstract that into a kind of, you know, like the language of like modern dance or something like this, or like quote unquote postmodern, I don't know, whatever, right? Like allows me to see it as materiality and not as and not as a totally separate infrastructure, if that makes any sense.
Yeah, I mean that makes me happy to hear, because I think a lot of what I try to do is to at least like open up a question. Like I don't expect everyone to understand what I'm doing, because I don't understand it while I'm doing it. I mean, the truth is I do a lot of things to understand them, which doesn't mean that I actually understand them in the end. It might mean that I open another question or another path. But maybe we could show the Flee Immediately dance and code scroll, because I think that speaks a lot of what you're talking about, because basically I was really dealing with this idea of like I was forcing people to do my choreography to be able to see the online exhibition. And I wanted to basically raise that question, like, are you going to follow it? Are you not? Are you going to see the works? Are you not? Like, what happens? I think did I put a video?
I don't know
the
that
scrolling.
I don't know that you did.
Okay.
But I can pull it up. Is it on your website?
Yeah, it's it's like the Flee Immediately O2 dancing code. You might have to perform, because you're gonna have to do the scrolling.
Oh, okay. Well then, here I'll share let me make a new window and we'll go through it. Why not? It seems appropriate.
Okay.
Okay.
But I think, like, for example, like that work I did in 2016, and it's quite interesting now again to think about it.
Everybody's a little bit slow right now. So we'll go here.
Yeah, I think if you go here to flee immediately on the right, versus flee immediately, and I think if you go click here in 2016, Dancing Code launched. So this is like the exhibition that you basically have to, that you have to zoom in. So you actually have to, with a command plus. Right.
Oh my God.
So I'm saying you have to do the performance. So there's 23 different works, so you can get lost. And actually something that's quite interesting maybe to talk about this work is I really struggled with it. Like I wrote all the code myself. So I think there's another level of me trying to create a choreography in code. There's also something very interesting that I actually never really wrote about this, but I think maybe it's something I should go back to. And if you click, each one opens an artwork. So it's not just my choreography, you can open them.
So rad.
I'm quite happy because it still works.
And maybe now's the time where if anyone has any questions, if they want to send them through the chat.
I'm assuming those are still loading. I know earlier Julia said that the first video made her think of salsa dancing, the same steps with iterations or the idea of the iterative. But actually, one of the questions that we had when we were thinking about flee immediately was like escape. Like, does escapism have anything to do with how you're thinking about things, Renee?
No, I think actually flee immediately is used ironically because it's like, I think it's actually the opposite. It's meant to be don't escape these weird technologies and figure out what they are. But actually flee immediately is it's a quote that Sir Arthur Conan Doyle wrote. So basically he sent a message to his friends, to random friends, saying all is revealed, flee immediately, without knowing if they had a secret or not. And basically some of them disappeared. And I think I started flee immediately after I finished my master's because I was frustrated with the way that technology was talked about and that it didn't address this idea of format and content together. Mm. And I started as a publication. So I did 2 printed issues that are, they're basically huge and you have to fold them. So already I was thinking of movement without thinking I was thinking of movement, but you have to actually fold them and open them to read it. And basically then I did this one, this online version. And it's a project that it's meant to be collaborative. I sometimes, there, something doesn't work. But I sometimes do things, I don't know, I guess it's a project I go back in and out of because somehow, at the moment I'm not doing much with it because I don't know what to do with it, basically. And I got bored of creating content for Instagram because for a while I was like creating these images that I quite enjoyed. Then I got bored. So yeah, that's the story of flee immediately, basically. But it's the idea of a place to experiment, that I can do these random things and have the possibility to do them without having to fit into some sort of rules or.
And Renee, maybe we can come back to, can you talk a little bit about your newer work and the blockchain, and maybe explain a little bit to everyone, because I feel like not everyone is really thinking about the blockchain.
Yeah, I mean, I don't actually know either. So because it's something it's like, actually I thought about it like 2 weeks ago, but I also think I quite like showing process. I don't know, for me it's also fine to, and I think it's, in one way, the blockchain is very hard to understand. But I think what I found interesting was, I thought of it as really a space to experiment this, because the blockchain is like, basically, for example, if you sell an artwork on the blockchain, it's not that the image of the artwork has value. It's the token or the transaction that is a contract that you share with the other person, or actually everyone, because when you do a transaction on the blockchain, everyone can see it. So I was quite interested in this idea that actually what is important is the format. It's not the content. What does that mean if I dance there? Because is there a way that I actually am connecting more with code? Because I think I'm still struggling this, or I'm not sure if I've actually managed to arrive at code itself or the algorithm. I think somehow maybe it's still a metaphor or thinking of it. So I thought, is the blockchain a way of arriving at that? Because, well, in some ways you have the transaction, which means there's movement happening. But then at the same time, this information is fixed. You can't delete it. And at the same time, you also have this other question that I find interesting, that basically when you do a transaction, everyone gets sent this information because it's decentralized. That's like the novelty of it, is decentralized. I don't think there's going to be this utopic idea that's going to change the world. I think, no, I mean, already you can see there's a lot of startups there. Like, you know, it's not, but I think maybe what's interesting is that there's a responsibility that you have to have as a person in it. And I was thinking of that in terms of dance in my relationship with code. But I don't know how I'll do it yet. I don't know where the dancing is. Like, where could the dancing be? I don't know. So I'm still like thinking of these things, but like these sort of questions are the questions that I ask in other works as well. But I thought maybe there's a way of connecting more to code in the blockchain. Maybe not. But
oh no, go ahead. I was wondering actually, like, we have a couple questions that are interesting and I wanted to pose them. But I also wanted to ask you if you could talk about the difference between dance and movement, and whether that's a meaningful distinction for you, and like whether that changes, and like maybe metaphor or allegory, like when you said that about whether or not you had approached code, like I was wondering about like, or whether you're making still a metaphor of the code, I guess. Yeah, but I wonder how you think about that and what that has to do with like the potential for blockchain to create dance and not just movement or something like this.
yeah, that's a good question, but I don't know if I can answer. I think it's something that at some point I have to define, if what is movement and what is dance. Probably if someone here comes from a background of dance, they might be cringing now, I don't know. But I think for me, maybe it's a question of a level of attention, maybe. Like maybe the scrolling online is not necessarily dance, but you can become aware of movements, and if you become aware enough, you could start dancing. Like maybe it's like how far you go in that relationship, maybe. I would say would be the difference for me. Now, I mean, I could probably find a definition, but I think for me it's something, yeah, I think it would be that. I think it's like, we're moving all the time. And maybe like as we process that, we can start to almost like, in a way, I think dance, what I find interesting about dance is it's a way of thinking that's very different for me. Like, I realize it's a way of thinking through your body that for some people comes very naturally, but it's something I had to learn. Like, I don't naturally dance. I actually have very much in my head, so I actually naturally am like blocking the dancing in a way. So I think maybe it's that. It's like feeling. Maybe it's a feeling, actually. I'm thinking out loud, but it could be that that's where the feeling comes in. It's like the level of feeling you have between movement and becoming a dance. I don't know if that makes sense.
It does. I think maybe like sideways related to that question is one that came in from Nancy, who wanted to know whether you feel any affinity with concrete poetry, or whether concrete poetry is too simple in its dimensionality as only words.
I think aesthetically, I feel an affinity with it, for sure. No, because I think for me, what I'm interested in maybe in code, is an idea of structure, of like putting together a structure. Because basically what a code is it's like the order of the way you should do things. That's a binary code, of course, because if you're talking about quantum computation, it's something else. But the codes that we use on our computers, for example, every day, I think I'm interested in, like, yeah, I don't know. I think it's something that I have thought about, and I think there's a big relationship between code poetry and concrete poetry. That's, I think, for me, is interesting. But it's not necessarily something that I'm like consciously thinking about, I would say. But like the history is present in what I read and what I do and the references I have. And also being here maybe in South America at the moment, because there was a big movement of that as well, which they still talk about here. So it's something that I sort of rediscovered after I moved here.
And Emmy wanted to know what other artists are you looking at who work at the intersection of code and choreography, or people who you're looking at or thinking about relating to the phenomenology of using a computer?
Yeah, so this is something that I'm really trying to work on now for my thesis, because I have to find examples, which is actually very hard for me to find ones I like. But there's an artist called Joanna Chicao. She's a young artist from Portugal, and she's a designer and choreographer. No, she's not a choreographer. She's a designer and dancer. And she does a lot of works with live coding, and she sort of thinks of design as choreography. And I think the way she thinks and aesthetically, and I don't know, I really feel an affinity to her work. Like my thesis will probably end up being about her work more than anyone else's. There's a lot of works with dance and technology, but it's a lot of them just use technology or use dance to sort of like balance, to say like the body's here, or look, dance can be formal and discrete as well. And I'm not interested in those works. I think I'm more interested in, I don't know, for example, Merce Cunningham. I can't avoid Merce Cunningham because, and even though he's like, I mean, most people know his work and there's a lot written about him, I think there's still a lot that isn't explored in a way that I'm not necessarily interested in the works that he does with software. I'm more interested in the way he thinks, because I think this sort of like algorithmic thinking, or like this sort of putting the formality in the body, of like stripping it all of the human, in the end it becomes more human. That was something he was doing before he used software as well. So I think I'm interested more in that relationship of like the Cunningham technique, maybe. And another one similar is maybe Anne Therese de Kiusmaker, who's a Belgian choreographer who, well, in her early work, Fase, which is done to the minimal music of Steve Reich, you can find it on YouTube. It's really beautiful piece. she also has this way of like, through repetition and geometry, she sort of strips the movements and then it becomes emotional. So, but I'm really working on that. So also if anyone has any suggestions as well, because I'm looking for something very specific, if maybe you notice. So it's very hard for me to, at least in terms of like the academic PhD. Of course, on my own, it's fine. But yeah, I would look at Joanna Chicao's work. That's like she does it better than I do it, in a way, you know. Oh, it's different, but you know.
And I wanted to sort of circle back. So for the latest issue of Precog, you wrote an essay called "The Rhythmic Slurp of Softness," which sort of talks about mate drinking rituals. And like also begins to like become a kind of like surreal, like, you know, like in the experience here, I'll pull it up. But in the experience of like the learning the ritual of mate and drinking mate, things also start to get like a little bit like you start talking about like history, you kind of like drift in and out of consciousness, and it's sort of like a place in the, and you know, like you kind of invoke all these sort of Latin American literary tropes. And I was wondering if you could talk about it in relation to, as you said earlier, like just having moved to Argentina, but also the idea of like, I think in this piece, your idea of the code or the algorithm as a metaphor, and the way that codes can be cultural as well as binary or something like this becomes really evident. So I just wanted to make a little bit of space to talk about that if you wanted to.
Yeah. I mean, yeah, basically I was in a weird moment when I wrote this text because, yeah, like you said, I just moved to Argentina. I was learning to write Spanish. I was trying to figure out how to do a PhD. I was trying to figure out my life in general. And basically it's a text about a moment I had that during one of the classes, because they always were drinking mate, which is this, well, I guess maybe a lot of you know, but the mate is this drink that you share. So you have the straw and the bombilla is called, and you share it, and you all, and it's like a ritual basically that happens here. And at some point they had asked, a girl had asked, "I'm a bit sick, do you mind?" And everyone was like, "Yeah, it's fine, we'll drink it." And I don't know why, but I started to connect that with my thinking of because at the moment I was also trying to develop what I was going to write my PhD on. I mean, I knew, but like the formalities of it. So somehow that connected with me to the idea of an algorithm. I don't know why. But that's what I tried to draw out in the text. And I think for me, I don't think of technology as limited to the computer. I think I don't know, you could go back to thinking of the wheel as like the first technology that changes the way we think. And I think it's a bit of that idea of like, you can't separate them. Like I can't separate my thinking from not using technology, because now they're so intertwined in a way. And so I don't know, I think I never really thought of it as a metaphor, or I've only been thinking recently of the idea that I use metaphors. And it's a problem that I have to solve, or maybe not, but it's something I'm thinking about, that can I actually really feel code? I mean, the first video we showed is like, am I actually feeling the code, or am I just feeling another interface or another output of the code? And maybe by writing a text such as that one, where I'm talking about mate and the algorithm in my daily life, maybe I feel more the code in that case than the other one. If I think about it now, like maybe that experience was more what I feel in relationship with my body and code than what I did when I danced in the other work. Maybe not, I don't know. It's something I'm still thinking about.
That's, yeah, I mean, I'm super fascinated in the whole ideas. I'm gonna like formally like, kind of call the end of our hour. And anyone who wants to unmute and chime in and kind of hang out for a little while, y'all are welcome to, especially as I go immediately into like the nerdiest question, which is like, I mean, for me, getting into some of your writing and like getting into some of your writing and reading about the connection to Flusser, Willem Flusser, and like his ideas about technology and gesture. I was, the way that you're talking about code just now, kind of related to this quote that you bring up in your writing, which I know I sort of sent you in the question, in the questions, but around, what is it? It's the idea that humanity isn't found in the pressing of keys, but in the production of keys. And so I'm wondering if this like desire to feel code has to do with this kind of like subconscious, like pre-verbal desire to kind of like communicate with the impetus that would make the structure, not like the effects of the structure as we use it. I don't know. That's the end of my question.
No, but I think it's, in a way, that's what I'm trying to get at in a weird way of like, because I think a lot of what I'm thinking about is how can we take back control of the technologies we use every day, which I think it's too late to do it officially, but maybe at least I can do it in the way I feel, or at least I have control over myself. Like, I can't speak for anyone else, but I can give an example of what I try to do. So yeah, and I think it's also important because a lot of times when we think about technology, we think about it as this sort of magical thing that we don't understand, or there is this narrative. Not everyone has it, but it still exists, this idea of technology. But in the end, it's people who write code that you have a lot of problems, because it's white men who write code that we use every day that then have a lot of biases in them. These are very real problems, and the thing for me I think is interesting to think about is that as technology advances and as artificial intelligence advances, which is also, calling it artificial intelligence is also something interesting to discuss. Like, is it intelligence? Like, that's another question. But I think for me, what's interesting to think now is like, well, I guess I always try to say, is it too late to think about artificial intelligence? Like, is it already, I don't know. These are the things I think about in this idea of, I guess there's always this division between the technology and the human as separate. But for me, they're already intertwined anyway. And also, if you think about it, there's this idea of like, I don't know, in 2000, there was the idea that everything was going to crash. And it was like, it's so new. And like, there are new things, but is it really new? It's another development of a long history of industrialization of, I don't know, that are of course different, and they have different paths and different meanings. But I think there's also this idea for me that technology isn't new. The narratives around it, the way we use it, maybe the now digital technologies, the acceleration. I don't know if that answers your question, but it's a lot of what I think about.
Yeah. Well, it's like the idea that even in saying artificial intelligence, you've created a split that doesn't need to be there, because like the intelligence, the artifice was created by the intelligence, like, the white men who code or whatever, and the algorithm or the structure will replicate the intelligence which has made the construction to begin with. So the idea that you would end up with something that could like something non-human that could think on its own is sort of a misnomer in a profound way.
Exactly. And it's not looking at what intelligence would it have on its own. Like, we give it our intelligence, but then it's
right.
Yeah.
Yeah. Do you have any like recommendations for us, like reading or dance recommendations?
I don't know. I recently, I don't know if you've read, or I don't know how popular it is, but there's a book by Karen Barad. Do you know it? It's Meeting the Universe Halfway. No, I'm never sure if like what I'm reading is known or not.
Did she write something about optimism or?
No, she's actually a physicist.
Okay.
And she talks about quantum physics, but with feminist theory, and it's actually super interesting because in some ways it's very mathematical and technical, but the same way not. Like she writes quite freely, but what she's talking a lot about is this idea of experiments that is she calls it agental realism, where each part it has like agency within the context of the experiment that's taking place. For me, I find it's this whole idea of like we're in relationship, and it's all about the relationships as well, but there's something interesting there because she's talking about like hard science and feminism, which I think for me really is somehow, I think, with dance and code, like this sort of like discrete, formal, exact, and then this sort of my feeling in my body. And I don't know, in terms of dance, Joanna Chicao's work, I would definitely check out. What else am I reading?
How do you spell her name? Joanna?
Joanna with an O, so like Joanna Chicao, like CHICAU. I think Joanna Chicao. I don't know, I haven't been reading in the moment. I can't read in quarantine.
I can't concentrate on anything for too long of a time. Other than like the things I already have to do, it's hard to,
Yeah. I also read a book by someone called Fernando Salome. I guess I'm quite geeky in this way because I like reading like mathematic books, like philosophy of mathematics, but it's a book on contemporary mathematics, which is quite interesting because he talks a lot about the binary, and he's saying that mathematics was always oscillating between like the ideal and the sort of man-made, or no, what you find in nature, and the I guess it's between the discovery and the invention. There's like specific terms in mathematics that I can't remember now. One is ideal and the other I can't remember. And I also found that quite interesting because it talks a lot about movement. I mean, for me, it made me think of movement, of this constant movement. But it never goes outside the binary, so I don't know. But it's interesting anyway. That there's not like one category of mathematics, that it's always been a process that changes over history and over time.
There's always got to be I feel like there's always got to be a prescriptivist and a descriptivist or something, like someone like in every field, like someone wants to write the rules and someone wants to be like, no, let's observe.
Yeah.